Well, I've done well over 200 videos, and this is my first video involving chemtrails, or what's known as chemtrails. And the reason for that is very simple. The chemtrails conspiracy, as it's propagated, is nonsense, absolute nonsense. People taking photographs in the sky of all the contrails and saying, well, it starts there and ends there, etc., without understanding how the plane's rising through the different layers, is nonsense. So it's not about that. Okay, and I actually think that conspiracy theory does a lot of damage because it's simply not right. And the other thing is, there's a thing going round, a rumour going round that the government's put 800 million into geoengineering, chemtrail stuff. And it hasn't. It's only put 50 million, and the 800 is for all of the work of that organisation, that research organisation. That includes artificial intelligence. It includes all sorts of other subjects. But the amount of money dedicated to the geoengineering experiment is 50 million, and I'm here to condemn that today, because I would like to see any form of geoengineering the atmosphere completely banned. So maybe both sides can agree on that. But I promise you, that anyone looking at the conspiracy theories that all these commercial aircraft fitted with tanks, you must be joking. To have an even extra kilogram on your luggage is chargeable. Weight on an aircraft is super important, and the idea that all these thousands of people are involved in it and there must be tanks at every airport to fill them up and so on is rubbish. Okay, so I just wanted to get that out of the way. But what you're going to get now in this video, it is me exploring the two aspects, if you like, of cooling the Earth by doing things to the atmosphere, by geoengineering the atmosphere, which I think is immoral, by the way. I think it's wrong, and I think it should be totally banned by any government. But here we go. Now, this is me exploring the concept. And by the way, it turned out that the first one, the clouds, weren't viable really, and even in terms of what they're trying to do, because they warm the planet. According to the alarmists, they warm the planet. Well, we're talking cirrus clouds there. And I had to travel on to the second solution, which is SO2, which is sulfur dioxide that comes out of volcanoes, for example. And so you'll see an evolution as I research this subject and lead you step by step to my conclusions. And then I look at the viability of the whole thing, even if they wanted to do it. Even if it turned out they wanted to do it, So I think this 50 million is a total waste of other people's money, because the government don't have any money of their own. They only have your money, and it's other people's money that this Labour government are absolutely expert at spending. But mind you, so were the previous Conservatives. Okay, so let's now start the video. The first experiment I can find done by the British government on geoengineering in the atmosphere happened in September 2022, when researchers in the UK launched a high-altitude weather balloon from a site in Buckinghamshire. The balloon released a small amount, about 400 grams, of sulfur dioxide into the stratosphere approximately 15 miles above Earth, and it burst during the second flight. The purpose? Well, it wasn't a full-scale geoengineering test, but rather an experiment to evaluate low-cost, controllable, recoverable balloon system for delivering substances into the stratosphere. The sulfur dioxide release may have been the very first verified instance of a measured gas payload released in the stratosphere for geoengineering-related research. Significance? Well, sulfur dioxide can form reflective particles in the atmosphere, a concept tied to solar geoengineering, though the test focused on the delivery technology rather than the climate impact, and of course 400 grams was small. Now, hard to believe, I know, but the experiment was called the Stratospheric Aerosol Transport Nucleation Experiment, and the short name for that is SATAN, SATAN. So, what happened? Well, the project involved launching the balloons to study stratospheric aerosol injection, a technique where tiny particles, aerosols, are released into the stratosphere to reflect sunlight. The SATAN experiment aimed to gather data on how aerosols move and form nuclei in the stratosphere, providing insights into the feasibility of solar engineering. Specific data locations are less publicised, but it's part of the UK's effort to understand the science behind these techniques. Now the site Geoengineering Monitor, which actually is involved with this subject as well as burying CO2 the other way around, has come up with three known experiments, as it were. The first was in Russia in 2009, and they sent helicopters up into the troposphere, which is not very high really, and I think probably more for a military exercise than anything else. But that was that one. In California, though, in 2022, there's an organisation called Make Sunsets. Good name, isn't it? And that did unauthorised flights, no permission, just started dumping some silicates into the atmosphere and has done a number of them. As a result of that, Mexico banned them, by the way. And there's an unknown number going on there by this organisation. So that's an unknown and ought to be dealt with. And thank goodness that certain states are banning this sort of nonsense. And I hope Trump gets it banned all over the USA. And lastly, of course, the 2022 exercise by the same professor who is going to have squandered this £50 million that he's been given. They did one with 400 grams, which I've already described. Sulfur dioxide is what you smell after you've just used a match, and it's a pollutant. It's really not a good thing to start spraying around. Here, we tried to reduce it over time and been pretty successful actually in reducing the amount as per this graph. But I don't have to tell you that our Energy Minister, Ed Miliband, does have his head in the clouds, and he's a specialist at one thing, and that's spending other people's money. The upcoming plan is for the UK government, through the Advanced Research and Invention Agency, to commit £50 million to fund further geoengineering research, including small-scale outdoor experiments. These could involve balloons or other methods, I suppose planes, etc., to test ideas like injecting aerosols or brightening clouds. Announcement about these projects are expected soon. But before I go any further in this, I would just like to do some scoping, just looking back of an envelope stuff at how practical all this is. And so I just want to make a few basic points to show how absurd it is. Well, the first problem is the jet stream. Now, the jet stream is high up, and it's where cirrus clouds are formed, those long, streaky clouds. And the first problem is that jet stream's all over the place. It meanders, can dissipate, can change with height, and the speed varies incredibly. Taking a cross-section here, you can see that depending on where you are on it, you're going to have incredibly different speeds. In this case, 150 miles an hour in the centre part, but it can be over 200 miles an hour. It varies all the time. And what forms those cirrus clouds now is having the moisture there for them to have particles to condense on. The moisture is not always there. It's not always at the same height as you may be spraying, for example. But you can have no idea where your particles are going to end up. The jet stream, in effect, is travelling 3,000 or 4,000 miles a day. So you can't just simply go above Britain, above the UK, and spray and have it affect the UK. No, you're going to be more like affecting Russia, Western Russia, than you are the UK. Problem 2. Clouds that cool also warm. We're talking about cirrus clouds here exclusively. These are the ones high up in the jet stream and so on. Right, on reflection, which they reflect back to space, 0.1 to 0.3 watts a square metre. But on the warming, they reckon it's 0.5 to 2 watts a square metre, so the net effect is warming. Day and night, warms even more at night, of course. And overall, it's a net warming effect. So why would one want to cool the planet by spraying and forming cirrus clouds that warm the planet? It's also, of course, worth noting that the warming effect near the equator may be 20 to 50% greater than at London's latitude, because the effect varies with latitude. And don't be confused with cumulus clouds, where in cumulus clouds the reflection back into space is enormous. It's actually in the region of 270 to 300 watts a square metre. And you feel that as soon as a cloud comes over when you're sunbathing. But the warming effect of like a cloud over you to warm you like a blanket is only 10 to 50 watts a square metre. So the net effect is somewhere between 220 to 290 watts a square metre cooling. They're the main thermostatic control of the planet. But here, we're not talking about those. We're talking about the net effect of cirrus clouds. So just at this point, it doesn't make sense. Well, now, for the reasons I've explained so far, I was ready to give up on the cirrus cloud formation. And of course, cumulus clouds are too near the ground to do things. But oh no, into my inbox popped a YouTube video from Peter Ridd, the coral reef man. And he was critiquing the recent BBC documentary, I think it was on Panorama, saying, can scientists save the planet? I mean, talk about journalists and scientists going off the trolley. Well, he actually dealt with some cloud formation to save the Great Barrier Reef by forming low clouds over the Great Barrier Reef. I would point out that the Great Barrier Reef is the size of Italy, yeah, but these idiots, well, I don't know what's happened. I mean, these scientists must be off their rockers, totally off their rockers. I mean, everyone, their feet have left the ground. So what I'm going to do now is just show you the stupidity of this low cloud cover on the Great Barrier Reef. And I'll just take a section from Peter Ridd's excellent video on it. It's not that long, well worth watching. Link is going to be in the description below this one. But I'll just show you this excerpt on the ridiculous cloud formation, and just take a note how quickly, within a few hundred yards, the clouds disappear.
The science is trying to improve a natural process. Clouds can reduce heat by reflecting the sun. This spray attempts to boost cloud cover, and that could help protect the reef.
So the cloud will reflect the sunlight to stop the water heating up.
This spray attempts to boost cloud cover.
Did you see that cloud?
And that could help protect the reef.
Have you ever seen such a pathetic cloud in your whole life? The Great Barrier Reef is as big as Italy. How many of those boats will you need, given the pitiful apology of clouds evaporated after a couple of 100 meters?
The really remarkable thing about this is if you did roll it out over the whole reef, or even a large enough area of the reef, you'd pretty much avoid bleaching entirely if you were to do it at absolutely full scale at its maximum capacity.
I estimate it would take between 1 and 10 million of those boats going 24/7. I mean, one problem with making clouds is that they move. And in any case, you need to be making an Italy-sized cloud continuously. All those boats, all dragging their anchors, smashing up the coral, all that diesel fuel burning. Look, this is a classical example of how scientists who have never been challenged on what they're doing and who are surrounded by totally impractical people can go completely barking crazy.
Nature is wonderful. It provides us with free experiments rather than spending tens of millions of taxpayers' money. So let's take the Tonga underwater eruption. That put in an estimated 150 million tons of water vapour into the atmosphere. It put in only 1.5 tons of sulfur dioxide. But the effect, well, some say it was 3/100ths of a degree warmer for the Earth. But others say about the same in cooling. The jury's out on it. But no matter which one's right, the result is tiny. It's not really measurable. You couldn't even feel it. And that's with this enormous amount. And it would require over 8,000 jumbos, each one with 50 tons of water. And each one flying into the stratosphere each day, shedding its 50 tons. And that's 8,000 flights a day for every day for a whole year to equal that amount of water vapour put in by the single volcano. What an experiment to have. And it didn't really change much. So given that it didn't change much, and I know the jury's out, but no matter what it changed to, it's very little, we can't possibly compete with that. So without going any further in this and looking at scaling and what resources are needed, we can really rule out cloud formation to control the temperature of the Earth. But I cannot proceed without considering not water vapour being put into the atmosphere, but SO2, sulfur dioxide, because that's what people seem to be using in all these experiments. And nature has provided the perfect example in the form of volcanic eruptions. Now, volcanic eruptions in the past have actually managed to at least contribute a lot to doing away with the summer, like in 1815-16, when it was called the year without a summer. And you need to look at that, because what they're putting into the atmosphere is that sulfur dioxide. And that's what the 2022 experiment in the UK was. Sulfur dioxide. Not the best thing, a nice pollutant to put into the atmosphere. But what would be needed? How could we go about using that to actually blank out the sun a lot in the UK? Well, first let's look at the history of this volcanic eruption to get some idea of what the effect would be. Although the Mount Tambora eruption reached the violent climax on the 10th of April 1815, increased steaming and small phreatic eruptions occurred during the next 6 months to 3 years. The ash from the eruption column dispersed around the world, although I would note that wasn't evenly, and lowered global temperatures in an event sometimes known as the year without a summer in 1816. This brief period of significant climate change triggered extreme weather and harvest failures in many areas around the world. Several climate forcings coincided and interacted in a systematic manner that has not been observed after any other large volcanic eruption since the early Stone Age. Well, there we are. Tambora was a great natural experiment, and we may be able to estimate anyway, the amount of material went into there and how it was distributed. We'll try and do that in a minute, but before we do that, we have to look at the other thing that was happening at the same time. This other climate forcing. What could it be? Well, guess what? Here it is now. It's the sun, that big red thing in the sky, and the lack of activity in it at that time, 1816, 1815. Yep, it was the Dalton minimum. And here's the pattern of sunspots. The sunspot cycle shows the activity on the sun, basically. So low activity means it's going to get colder. And you can see here, we're coming here into the Little Ice Age, and through the Maunder minimum here, the depth of the Little Ice Age. Well, we start to recover out the Little Ice Age at the very end of the 1600s here. And then we continue to recover, but then suddenly there was this drop called the Dalton minimum. And that is when this 1815-6 period was. We then continued to warm after 1900 to our present day conditions. So this Dalton minimum was the other factor that played a role in the cooling of our planet, together with that volcano. So we now have to determine just what amount of sulfur dioxide went into the atmosphere. How much was there? Because this is fundamental to understanding how mankind could do this, how mankind could artificially black out the sun. So let's look at that first, and then where it was distributed during that volcanic eruption. Well, to give you some perspective and to understand just how much Mount Tambora gave out, I'm going to go through a little bit of history here. Mount St. Helena in 1980, that gave off 1 to 2 million tons of sulfuric dioxide. Now, coming later, Mount Pinatubo in 1991 gave off between 17 to 20 million tons of SO2, so it was much bigger. But Mount Tambora, 1815, dwarfs them all. From ice cores and volcanic deposits, it's been determined that 60 million tons of sulfur dioxide were put into the atmosphere. That is an incredible amount. But what effect did it have? Well, it's estimated that the global temperature fell by 0.7 of 1 degree. Before the eruption, it was clear that the Dalton's minimum had actually cooled the planet by about 0.2 to 0.3 degrees centigrade. Hence, the 60 million tons of SO2 cooled Earth by about 0.45 degrees centigrade. That's all, less than half a degree centigrade. And the effect lasted just over a year, between 1 and 2 years. There were some effects going on for up to 5 years, but they're not to do with much temperature reduction. Well, this gives some idea of the complex wind patterns around the world, and of course, they change all the time. So where did our big Tambora volcano occur? Well, it occurred here in Indonesia, But of course it did have effects worldwide, but not evenly spread worldwide. So we'll now look at that. This is an image showing the temperature differences caused over this area by the volcanic eruption. The area here actually warmed. You can see the scale below the chart there. The yellowy orange colours are actually warming. The blue colours cooled, and the depth of the blue shows the amount of cooling. Here in the UK, it was minus 2 degrees or so. But here in France, it was actually minus 3.3 degrees. So it's clear from this chart that the distribution of the effects of the volcano are not even. The east coast of America also suffered badly with cold. So what you cannot do by injecting things into the atmosphere is know where they're going to end up and what the differences are going to be. You actually can warm some areas of the planet and rapidly cool others. There's all sorts of issues here. Well, so there we are, 60 million tonnes in the air, spread throughout the year this time, of course, and that's dividing it up into 365 days. They haven't even allowed for holidays. And the question then is what resources are needed to do that? And the answer is quite startling. Yeah. And so what we're going to do now is examine just what's involved in doing this, so we can probably lower parts of the world by 2 degrees. Other parts of the world will warm on average less than half a degree. So what is needed? And by the way, can I just point out at this point that the conspiracy theorists who say you can put additives in fuel, forget it. Already the contrails have a dimming effect already, actually, and that was evident the day after all the planes had been stopped in 9/11 in America, when the skies were so crystal clear and there was more radiation. So that is already happening in that sense, but they're just ordinary contrails, have been happening all the time. So what we're talking about here is 50 tonnes of sulfur dioxide per jumbo jet being sprayed, right? Well, here are the figures. It would take 3,381 flights a day from 3,381 jumbo jets. It would take 50 tonnes of SO2 on each jumbo jet for each trip. Today, the average worldwide is 241 jumbo flights a day from 100 airports, and have allowed for the same 100 airports to do these trips. It would cost 1.01 trillion for the planes. And every year then, you'd have to spend 70.2 billion to run those planes. And that includes the depreciation on the planes. In addition to that, you'd have to spend £4.5 trillion a year for the sulfur dioxide. And you would use 7.2 billion gallons a year of aviation fuel and have 960,000 tonnes per year of CO2 put into the atmosphere because of that fuel. So once you did all this to achieve your target less than half a degree global cooling, even though you get huge variation between cold and warm, I mean, basically, no one would know whether to put on a bikini to bathe at the beach or to put on some very warm clothing to bathe on the beach. While thinking that CO2 would be beneficial, because that would be my opinion, right, there are some little problems we will have now created for all this huge effort by mankind to lower the temperature on average less than half a degree. Well, firstly, it would change the rainfall distribution. The effect of that could be enormous, leading to droughts, floods and famines, because that's exactly what happened when the volcano went off. Secondly, it could interfere with the ozone layer, and if it did that, it would lead to increased cancer and other risks. Thirdly, it would trigger rapid warming and cooling, and you couldn't say where that's going to happen. It would really be a very disruptive influence on the climate. But there would be particular impacts on human beings, so I'll just look at that now. Well, the first thing to know is that the sulfur dioxide you're injecting into the atmosphere doesn't stay that way, because it combines with water vapour, H2O, and oxygen molecules to form H2SO4. Now, H2SO4, guess what that is? It's sulfuric acid. So it's no surprising that we have an impact on animals and humans here, but I'm just going to deal with humans. Right. First of all, respiratory problems, especially if you've got asthma, but even without that, it can cause them. Then cardiovascular disease. Yep. Then acid rain exposure, because obviously the sulfuric acids can be in the rain. And then, of course, skin cancer risk. That's depletion of the ozone layer, etc., can cause that. And obviously, eye irritation is a big one, actually, in it. Immune system suppression, neurological effects, and reproductive health issues that can actually affect sterility and childhood development issues. And also pregnant women are particularly prone to fetal development with the pollution like this. So why on earth, just why on earth, are we even experimenting with these things? So how do I round all this up? Well, who decides, first of all, to put this poison into the atmosphere? Well, in the UK, it's an organisation, the AIRA. It's there, and it's this chap here. He's the chief executive, Mr. Gull, and he decides. Now, that decision apparently is vetted by the environmental committee or subcommittee there, which I don't have any faith in at all, because the whole idea is potty before you begin. Yeah, and then that's it. And of course, government can always override a quango, we're told. They actually, in fact, they don't. Governments these days appoint lots of quangos to hide behind. Yeah, that's what they do, because they don't. They're completely out of control themselves. There are so many stupid people in government, it's hard to believe. So that's where we are. And I think it's totally immoral to do this. I think any sort of aerosol spraying like this into the atmosphere, and I would include rainmaking in that, which is going on 100 years. I would include that. Any chemical that's going in that's going to harm us should be banned. Full stop. And I know I've ruffled some feathers in this. People who think that commercial aeroplanes with all these contrails are actually poisonous. That's not true. So I know that, but I hope everyone has learned on my progress through looking at this. And the reason why I haven't looked at it before is simply because the conspiracy theories are bonkers. But now that I found out that in California they're actually doing this, and they're doing it without authorization, but some states are banning it now, and I hope countries ban it, But the whole thing, as I've proven, is totally unworkable. I haven't included all the cost. What my video has been about here is a back of an envelope thing. Is this feasible? And it's not. Okay, well, thank you for watching. Look forward to seeing you on the next video. Bye.